What if I told you that some of history's most brutal torture victims didn't just survive their ordeals? They used their suffering to build vast fortunes that made them among the wealthiest people of their time. Hidden in the shadows of ancient history lies a remarkable survival strategy so effective that it transformed victims of the most horrific tortures into millionaire merchants, influential nobles, and even royalty. This isn't just another story of human resilience. This is the untold history of how systematic torture, designed to break both body and spirit, was turned into the foundation for unprecedented wealth and power. The strategy was so sophisticated that it created underground networks, spanning continents, generated financial empires that lasted centuries, and ultimately changed the course of global commerce. The victims who mastered this technique didn't just endure torture, they weaponized it, turning their scars into symbols of credibility, their suffering into social capital, and their survival into the ultimate business advantage. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about ancient economics, human psychology, and the true price of survival. The merchant prince of Damascus in the year 847 AD, a young Syrian trader named Khalil ibn Rashid, was captured by Byzantine raiders while traveling the Silk Road. What followed were 6 months of systematic torture designed to extract information about trade routes and merchant networks. The Byzantines broke his fingers one by one, burned patterns into his skin with heated iron, and subjected him to water torture techniques that left him permanently scarred. When Khalil was finally released in a prisoner exchange, he appeared to be a broken man. His hands were twisted and scarred, his face bore permanent marks from torture, and he walked with a permanent limp. Any reasonable observer would have assumed his trading days were over. Instead, Khalil ibn Rashid was about to become one of the wealthiest men in the medieval world. What the Byzantines didn't know was that Khalil belonged to a secretive network of merchants who had developed an extraordinary survival strategy. Instead of hiding their torture scars, they displayed them proudly. Instead of concealing their suffering, they transformed it into the ultimate mark of trustworthiness and credibility in the dangerous world of long-distance trade. The strategy was based on a profound understanding of human psychology and medieval economics. In a world where merchant transactions often involved enormous sums of money and months-long journeys through hostile territory, trust was the most valuable commodity, and nothing created trust like visible proof that a merchant had already survived the worst that enemies could inflict. Khalil's scars told potential business partners that he had been tested under the most extreme circumstances and had never betrayed his associates. His twisted hands proved that he had endured torture without revealing trade secrets. His limp demonstrated that he understood the true costs of commerce and would never take risks lightly. Within 2 years of his release, Khalil had parlayed his reputation as a torture survivor into exclusive trading contracts worth the equivalent of millions in today's currency. Merchants across the Islamic world competed to partner with him, knowing that his survival of Byzantine torture guaranteed his reliability and discretion. But Khalil's success was just the beginning. The survival strategy that turned his torture scars into wealth was part of a much larger system that had been operating in secret for centuries, creating some of history's most remarkable rags-to-riches stories. If this incredible transformation from torture victim to millionaire has captured your attention, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're uncovering the hidden strategies that changed lives and created fortunes throughout history. And you won't want to miss these remarkable stories of survival and success. The economics of Sprinto. Understand how torture victims became millionaires. We need to examine the unique economic conditions of the ancient and medieval world. Long-distance trade was extraordinarily dangerous and profitable, with successful merchants earning returns of 300 to 500% on their investments. But these enormous profits came with equally enormous risks. Merchant caravans faced constant threats from bandits, hostile armies, corrupt officials, and natural disasters. Successful traders needed to carry vast sums of money and valuable goods across thousands of miles of dangerous territory. Most importantly, they needed to work with business partners they might never meet in person, relying on trust and reputation in an era before modern banking or legal systems. In this environment, credibility was literally worth its weight in gold. Merchants would pay premium prices to work with traders they could trust completely. They preferred partners who had already proven their reliability under the most extreme circumstances, and nothing proved reliability quite like surviving systematic torture without betraying one's associates. The survival strategy emerged from this economic reality. Merchants who had been captured and tortured by enemies discovered that their scars and injuries rather than ending their careers, actually enhanced their value in the marketplace. Clients were willing to pay higher fees to traders who had demonstrated absolute loyalty under torture. Business partners competed to form alliances with merchants whose torture survival proved their trustworthiness. Master Hakim al-Dimashqi, writing in the 10th century, documented the phenomenon in his Merchant's Manual: seek the partnerships with those who bear the marks of enemy torment. For their flesh has been tested, and their spirits proven unbreakable. Such men guard secrets as dragons guard gold, and their word becomes bonds stronger than iron. The economic incentives were so strong that some merchants actually sought out dangerous assignments that might result in capture and torture, understood that surviving such ordeals would establish reputations that could generate lifetime wealth. The more severe the torture, the more valuable the survivor became in the marketplace. This created a perverse economic dynamic where suffering became a pathway to prosperity. Torture victims who mastered the survival strategy could command premium prices for their services, exclusive access to the most profitable trade routes, and partnerships with the wealthiest merchants and nobles. But the strategy required more than just surviving torture. It demanded sophisticated understanding of psychology, marketing, and business networking that transformed individual suffering into systematic wealth creation. The Brotherhood of Scars, the merchants who turned torture survival into wealth, didn't operate as isolated individuals. They formed secretive networks known as Brotherhoods of Scars, exclusive organizations that provided mutual support, shared business opportunities, and refined the techniques for converting suffering into success. These brotherhoods operated across cultural and religious boundaries, uniting Christian, Muslim, Jewish, and pagan merchants who shared the common bond of torture survival. Members communicated through coded symbols and secret rituals that allowed them to identify each other in distant markets. They developed standardized methods for displaying scars and injuries to maximum business advantage. The most sophisticated brotherhood operated along the Silk Road between Constantinople and Beijing, led by a mysterious figure known only as the Burned Man. This network included over 200 merchants who had survived various forms of torture and transformed their experiences into extraordinary wealth. Members of the Brotherhood underwent intensive training in what they called scar speaking, the art of telling their torture stories in ways that maximized business credibility. They learned to display their injuries strategically, emphasizing scars that demonstrated loyalty and discretion while downplaying wounds that might suggest weakness or incompetence. The Brotherhood also developed sophisticated marketing techniques that amplified the business value of torture survival. Members would arrange for accidental discoveries of their scars during business negotiations, creating dramatic moments that sealed deals worth enormous sums. They practiced storytelling techniques that emphasized their loyalty and reliability, while building emotional connections with potential partners. Perhaps most importantly, the Brotherhood created a mutual support system that helped members leverage their individual suffering into collective wealth. They shared information about the most profitable trade opportunities, collaborated on large-scale ventures that required multiple partners, and provided financial backing for members who needed capital to expand their operations. The system was so effective that Brotherhood members consistently earned 50 to 100% more than ordinary merchants engaged in similar trading activities. Their torture-enhanced reputations opened doors to exclusive opportunities that generated enormous profits. Some members parlayed their initial success into vast commercial empires that dominated entire regions. Marco of Amalfi, a Brotherhood member who had survived Saracen torture in 1187, used his enhanced credibility to secure exclusive trading rights with the Byzantine emperor. His torture scars, which proved his discretion and reliability, earned him a monopoly on silk imports that generated profits equivalent to $50 million annually in modern currency. But the Brotherhood's success attracted attention from authorities, who began to suspect that torture survival was being manipulated for commercial advantage. This led to increasing scrutiny and eventual persecution that forced the networks to develop even more sophisticated techniques for converting suffering into wealth. The theater of pain. The most successful torture victim entrepreneurs understood that their scars and injuries were not just proof of survival. They were performance tools that could be used to create compelling business presentations. They developed sophisticated theatrical techniques that transformed their suffering into persuasive commercial narratives. The performance began with careful preparation of the physical evidence. Scars were treated with techniques that enhanced their visibility and dramatic impact. Injuries were maintained, and sometimes artificially extended, to maximize their psychological effect on business partners. Some survivors even commissioned artists to create artistic enhancements that made their wounds more visually striking. Master Giovanni of Venice, who had survived Turkish torture in 1204, documented detailed instructions for scar presentation. That became standard practice among torture victim merchants. His techniques included optimal lighting conditions for displaying wounds, body positioning that emphasized dramatic scars, and clothing choices that revealed injuries at psychologically optimal moments during business negotiations. The storytelling component was equally sophisticated. Successful torture victim merchants developed compelling narratives that emphasized their loyalty, discretion, and reliability, while creating emotional connections with potential business partners. They learned to modulate their voices, time their revelations, and use dramatic pauses to maximize the impact of their torture stories. The most effective presentations combined physical evidence with carefully crafted narratives that positioned the torture survivor as the ideal business partner. The scars proved that the merchant had been tested under extreme circumstances. The survival demonstrated resilience and determination. The refusal to betray associates during torture guaranteed future loyalty. These presentations were so compelling that many business deals were concluded based primarily on the merchant's torture survival story rather than traditional commercial considerations. Clients were willing to pay premium prices and accept less favorable terms to work with traders whose suffering guaranteed their trustworthiness. But the theatrical approach required careful calibration. Too much emphasis on suffering could make the merchant appear weak or damaged. Too little emphasis could waste the business value of the torture experience. The most successful practitioners developed sophisticated techniques for balancing vulnerability and strength in their presentations. The performance skills developed by torture victim merchants influenced broader commercial practices throughout the medieval world. Their techniques for building trust and credibility through personal narrative became standard elements of business negotiation that persisted for centuries. The transformation economy, the success of torture victim, created what historians now recognize as the world's first transformation economy, a systematic marketplace where personal suffering was converted into commercial value. Through sophisticated psychological and business techniques, the transformation economy operated on several levels simultaneously. Individual merchants converted their personal torture experiences into enhanced business credibility. Networks of torture survivors collaborated to amplify their collective market value. Entire regions developed specialized industries based on the commercial potential of suffering and survival. The city of Trebizond became the center of the transformation economy during the 12th and 13th centuries. Located at the intersection of European, Asian, and Middle Eastern trade routes, Trebizond attracted torture survivors from across the known world. The city's merchants specialized in identifying and developing the commercial potential of recent torture victims, providing training, financing, and business connections that helped survivors convert their suffering into wealth. Trebizond's houses of transformation were specialized institutions that combined elements of hospitals, business schools, and investment banks. Torture survivors received medical treatment to optimize the appearance and presentation of their injuries. They underwent intensive training in business techniques, storytelling, and psychological manipulation. Most importantly, they received financial backing and business connections that allowed them to capitalize on their enhanced credibility. The transformation process typically took 6 to 18 months and cost the equivalent of $100,000 to $300,000 in modern currency. But the investment generated extraordinary returns, with successful graduates earning enough to repay their costs within 2 to 3 years and accumulate substantial wealth within a decade. The most successful houses of transformation developed sophisticated assessment techniques for evaluating the commercial potential of different torture experiences. They created rating systems that measured the business value of various types of scars, injuries, and survival stories. They maintained databases of successful transformation cases that helped them refine their techniques and improve their success rates. The transformation economy became so sophisticated that it began to influence torture practices themselves. Some captors learned to inflict injuries that would enhance rather than diminish their victims' future commercial prospects. Certain types of torture were avoided because they created scars that suggested weakness rather than strength. The most commercially valuable torture experiences were those that demonstrated loyalty and discretion without permanently disabling the victim. This created a bizarre dynamic where torture became a form of involuntary business training that could generate enormous wealth for survivors who mastered the transformation techniques. The most successful torture victim merchants accumulated fortunes that exceeded those of traditional nobles and merchants, who had never experienced such ordeals. The science of credibility, the transformation of torture victims into wealthy merchants, wasn't based on superstition or luck. It was grounded in sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social dynamics that anticipated modern research by centuries. The torture survivors who became millionaires had discovered fundamental principles of trust, credibility, and persuasion that remained relevant today. The psychological foundation of their success lay in what modern researchers call costly signaling, the principle that actions which involve significant personal cost are more credible indicators of commitment than cheap or easy demonstrations. Torture scars represented the ultimate costly signal, proving that the bearer had endured extreme suffering without betraying their principles or associates. But medieval merchants intuitively understood that anyone could claim to be trustworthy, reliable, or loyal. But only those who had actually been tested under torture could provide physical proof of these qualities. The scars served as biological credentials that couldn't be forged or faked, creating unshakable credibility in business relationships. The torture survivors also exploited psychological principles related to empathy and emotional connection. Business partners who heard detailed torture stories developed powerful emotional bonds with the survivors, creating relationships that transcended purely commercial considerations. The shared emotional experience of the torture narrative created trust and loyalty that generated long-term business advantages. Perhaps most importantly, the torture victim merchants understood the psychology of risk assessment in high-stakes business environments. Potential partners knew that anyone who had survived systematic torture possessed extraordinary mental and physical resilience. They had already proven their ability to perform under extreme pressure and maintain their commitments regardless of personal cost. Master Abd al-Rahman of Cordoba, writing in the 11th century, documented the psychological principles underlying torture victim success. The merchant who has drunk deeply from the cup of suffering knows the true taste of commitment. His flesh bears witness to his constancy, and his survival proclaims his worth above all protestations of loyalty. The most successful torture victim merchants refined these psychological insights into systematic techniques for building credibility and trust. They developed standardized methods for revealing their torture experiences at optimal moments in business negotiations. They learned to calibrate their emotional presentations to maximize impact on different types of business partners. The scientific approach to credibility creation allowed torture survivors to achieve success rates that far exceeded those of ordinary merchants. Their systematic application of psychological principles generated predictable and reproducible results that transformed individual suffering into consistent wealth creation. As we reach the midpoint of this incredible journey into the economy of suffering, take a moment to subscribe and share this video with anyone interested in the extraordinary ways humans have turned adversity into advantage. The techniques these ancient entrepreneurs developed reveal timeless principles about trust, credibility, and success that remain powerful today. The royal transformation, the most remarkable examples of torture victim success, involved individuals who parlayed their suffering into actual nobility and royal connections. These cases demonstrate the ultimate potential of the transformation strategy, showing how systematic torture could become the foundation for joining the highest levels of medieval society. The most famous case involved a Saxon merchant named Aldrich the Scarred, who was captured by Viking raiders in 892 AD and subjected to 3 months of ritualistic torture designed to extract information about Anglo-Saxon defensive strategies. The Vikings used techniques specifically chosen to create maximum pain while keeping their victim alive and conscious. When Aldrich was finally ransomed by his family, he bore horrific scars from burning, cutting, and bone-breaking torture. His left hand had been deliberately crushed, leaving it permanently deformed. His face carried ritual scarification that marked him as having survived the Vikings' most extreme interrogation methods. Any normal person would have hidden these and tried to rebuild their life quietly. Instead, Aldrich transformed his torture experience into a royal appointment. He approached King Alfred of Wessex with a proposal. His torture scars proved that he had never revealed Anglo-Saxon secrets under extreme duress, making him the ideal diplomat for negotiations with Viking leaders. His survival demonstrated the kind of resilience and loyalty that the kingdom needed in its most sensitive positions. King Alfred was so impressed by Aldrich's presentation that he appointed him as special envoy to Viking territories, with authority to negotiate treaties and trade agreements. The appointment came with extensive lands, a noble title, and annual revenues equivalent to $5 million in modern currency. Aldrich's torture scars, which should have marked him as a victim, instead became his credentials for joining the royal court. But Aldrich's success wasn't unique. Throughout medieval Europe, torture survivors used their experiences to gain access to royal courts, secure noble titles, and accumulate vast wealth. The pattern was remarkably consistent. Individuals who could demonstrate absolute loyalty through torture survival were rewarded with positions of trust and authority that generated enormous financial returns. The Countess Matilda of Tuscany employed several torture survivors as her personal advisors and diplomatic representatives. She understood that their survival guaranteed their discretion and loyalty in ways that ordinary appointments could not match. The torture survivors she employed accumulated wealth and influence that exceeded many traditional nobles. Emperor Frederick Barbarossa maintained a special guard unit composed entirely of torture survivors, whose loyalty had been proven through extreme suffering. Members of this unit received land grants, noble titles, and commercial privileges that made them among the wealthiest individuals in the Holy Roman Empire. The royal transformation strategy required sophisticated understanding of court politics and diplomatic protocols. Successful torture survivors learned to present their experiences in ways that emphasized their value to rulers, while minimizing any suggestion of weakness or damage. They positioned themselves as uniquely qualified for sensitive positions that required absolute trustworthiness. The strategy was so effective that some individuals actually sought out opportunities for capture and torture, understanding that survival would open doors to royal service and enormous wealth. This created a bizarre dynamic where systematic suffering became a career strategy for ambitious merchants and courtiers. The international networks as the torture victim transformation strategy proved its effectiveness. Sophisticated international networks emerged to systematize and optimize the process. These networks operated across cultural and religious boundaries, creating the world's first global marketplace for converting suffering into wealth. The most extensive network was known as the Golden Scars and operated from bases in Constantinople, Cairo, Baghdad, and Samar. This organization specialized in identifying torture survivors with commercial potential, providing them with training and resources, and connecting them with business opportunities across the known world. Golden Scars developed standardized assessment procedures for evaluating the commercial value of different torture experiences. They created rating systems that measured factors such as the severity of injuries, the duration of torture, the secrets that were protected during the ordeal, and the psychological resilience demonstrated by the survivor. The organization also established training programs that taught torture survivors how to maximize the business value of their experiences. These programs included instruction in storytelling techniques, scar presentation methods, psychological manipulation, and business networking. Graduates received certification that guaranteed their competence in transformation techniques. Perhaps most importantly, Golden Scars created financial instruments that allowed torture survivors to monetize their experiences immediately rather than waiting to build their reputations gradually. The organization would provide upfront payments to survivors in exchange for percentages of their future earnings, creating the world's first market for trading in human suffering. The financial arrangements were extraordinarily sophisticated. Golden Scars developed actuarial tables that predicted the earning potential of torture survivors based on their injuries, background, and training. They created insurance policies that protected investors against the risk that survivors might fail to generate expected returns. They even established secondary markets where investors could trade their stakes in torture survivors' future earnings. The international scope of the network allowed for sophisticated arbitrage opportunities. Torture survivors who had limited commercial prospects in their home regions could be relocated to markets where their specific experiences were more valuable. A merchant who had survived Byzantine torture might be relocated to Islamic territories, where his experience would generate premium credibility with Muslim business partners. Golden Scars also developed techniques for artificially enhancing the commercial value of torture experiences. They provided medical treatments that improved the appearance of scars, psychological training that enhanced survivors' storytelling abilities, and even cosmetic procedures that made injuries more dramatically visible to business partners. The network's success attracted imitators and competitors throughout the medieval world. By the 13th century, Dozens of organizations specialized in various aspects of the torture victim transformation economy. Competition between these networks drove continuous innovation in techniques for converting suffering into wealth. The manufacturing of martyrs. The torture victim transformation economy matured. Some organizations began to push the boundaries of ethical practice by actively creating torture opportunities, rather than simply capitalizing on random suffering. These martyr manufacturing operations represented the darkest evolution of the transformation strategy. The practice began with merchants who deliberately sought out dangerous assignments where capture and torture were likely. They would volunteer for trade missions to hostile territories, diplomatic assignments in enemy capitals, or exploration ventures in lawless regions. The goal was to increase their chances of experiencing torture that could later be converted into commercial advantage. But some organizations went further, creating artificial torture scenarios designed to produce commercially valuable scars and experiences without the genuine risk of random capture. These operations required sophisticated staging and coordination to create convincing evidence of torture survival that could fool business partners and clients. The most elaborate martyr manufacturing operation was discovered in Sicily in 1204, when authorities uncovered a network that had been creating fake torture experiences for wealthy merchants who wanted to enhance their commercial credibility. The operation included professional torturers who knew how to inflict painful but non-permanent injuries, medical specialists who could create realistic-looking scars, and storytelling coaches who helped clients develop convincing narratives about their survival. The Sicilian operation charged fees equivalent to $500,000 to $2 million in modern currency for complete torture transformation packages. Clients would undergo carefully controlled torture experiences that created visible injuries and psychological trauma without causing permanent disability or death. They would then receive training in presenting their experiences for maximum commercial advantage. The artificial torture was remarkably sophisticated, using techniques borrowed from genuine torture practices but modified to optimize commercial outcomes. The torturers understood which types of injuries created the most credible evidence of survival without actually damaging the client's ability to conduct business. They knew how to create scars that told compelling stories about loyalty and resilience. The discovery of martyr manufacturing operations created enormous controversy within the torture victim transformation community. Genuine survivors argued that artificial torture devalued their authentic experiences and undermined the credibility of the entire system. They demanded techniques for distinguishing between real and fake torture experiences. This led to the development of sophisticated authentication methods for verifying torture experiences. Networks of genuine survivors created testing procedures that could identify artificial scars, psychological evaluations that distinguished between real and simulated trauma, and background investigations that confirmed the circumstances of torture. Claims the authentication systems became so sophisticated that they influenced broader medieval practices for verifying identity and credentials. The techniques developed for distinguishing genuine torture survivors were adapted for authenticating other types of personal experiences and qualifications. The economics of authenticity. The emergence of artificial torture operations forced the transformation economy to develop sophisticated methods for distinguishing between genuine and manufactured suffering. This created an entirely new market for authentication services and verification techniques that added another layer of complexity to the torture victim economy. Genuine torture survivors formed exclusive guilds that provided authentication services for business partners who wanted to verify the authenticity of potential associates' experiences. These guilds developed detailed testing procedures that examined scars, evaluated psychological responses, and investigated the historical circumstances of alleged torture incidents. The authentication process was remarkably thorough. Guild experts could identify telltale signs of artificial scarring, detect inconsistencies in torture narratives, and cross-reference historical records to verify the circumstances of alleged capture and torture. They maintained databases of known torture techniques from different regions and time periods, allowing them to spot anachronisms or impossibilities in claimed experiences. Master Ibrahim of Damascus, head of the largest authentication guild, documented over 300 different techniques for distinguishing genuine from artificial torture experiences. His methods included medical examination of scars to determine their age and origin, psychological evaluation to assess trauma responses, and historical investigation to verify the circumstances of alleged torture. The authentication services commanded premium prices, with verification procedures costing 10 to 20% of the value of major business deals. But clients were willing to pay these fees because authentic torture survivors provided such significant commercial advantages that the cost of verification was easily justified by improved business outcomes. The authentication market also created opportunities for corruption and fraud. Some authentication specialists could be bribed to provide false verification of artificial torture experiences. Others developed techniques for creating seemingly genuine scars and trauma responses that could fool standard authentication procedures. This led to an arms race between authentication techniques and counterfeiting methods that drove continuous innovation in both genuine and artificial torture identification. The competition between authenticators and counterfeiters produced increasingly sophisticated techniques that influenced broader medieval practices for verifying identity and credentials. The economics of authenticity also created incentives for protecting and enhancing genuine torture experiences. Survivors learned to maintain their scars properly, preserve documentary evidence of their ordeals, and develop networks of witnesses who could verify their experiences. The most valuable torture survivors were those who could provide the most convincing and thoroughly documented proof of their suffering. The decline in legacy. The torture victim transformation economy reached its peak during the 13th century, but began to decline due to a combination of changing economic conditions, religious opposition, and the development of alternative methods for establishing business credibility. The rise of more sophisticated banking and legal systems reduced the importance of personal trust in commercial transactions. Written contracts, legal guarantees, and institutional oversight provided alternative methods for ensuring business reliability that didn't depend on personal suffering. The development of credit systems and commercial law made torture-based credibility less necessary for successful commerce. Religious authorities also began to oppose the torture victim transformation economy on moral grounds. Church leaders argued that profiting from suffering was spiritually corrupting, and that the artificial creation of torture experiences was fundamentally evil. The Papal Bull of 1267 specifically condemned the practice of seeking profit through the display of wounds and threatened excommunication for those who participated in martyr manufacturing. Perhaps most importantly, the success of the torture victim transformation strategy led to its own obsolescence. As torture survival became widely recognized as a path to wealth, the practice lost its credibility as proof of genuine loyalty and discretion. Business partners became skeptical of torture claims, understanding that many such experiences had been artificially created or exaggerated for commercial advantage. The decline was gradual, but inexorable. By the early 14th century, torture-based credibility had become so associated with fraud and manipulation that displaying torture scars in business contexts actually damaged rather than enhanced commercial prospects. The transformation networks disbanded or adapted to other forms of commercial activity, but the legacy of the torture victim transformation economy persisted in subtle ways throughout history. The psychological principles underlying torture-based credibility influenced later developments in marketing, sales, and business networking. The organizational techniques developed by transformation networks provided models for other types of commercial associations. Modern research has identified elements of torture victim transformation strategies in contemporary business practices. The use of personal adversity to build credibility, the strategic revelation of vulnerability to create emotional connections, and the conversion of suffering into social capital all remain recognizable in current commercial and professional contexts. The authentication techniques developed to distinguish genuine from artificial torture experiences influenced broader practices for verifying credentials and identity. The sophisticated testing procedures and documentation requirements pioneered by torture victim guilds provided models for professional certification and credentialing systems that persist today. Perhaps most importantly, the torture victim transformation. The economy demonstrated the extraordinary human capacity to convert even the most extreme adversity into opportunity and advantage. The merchants who turned their suffering into wealth proved it with sufficient creativity, determination, and strategic thinking. Almost any experience could be transformed into commercial value. The psychological revolution transformation strategy created the world's first systematic understanding of how personal adversity could be converted into social and commercial advantage. This psychological breakthrough influenced not only medieval commerce, but also broader human understanding of resilience, authenticity, and the nature of trust. The torture survivors who became wealthy merchants had discovered fundamental principles about human psychology that wouldn't be formally recognized by academic research for centuries. They understood that people form stronger emotional connections with those who have demonstrably suffered for their principles. They recognized that authenticity requires some form of costly demonstration that can't be easily faked or replicated. These insights led to sophisticated techniques for managing public perception and building personal credibility that anticipated modern developments in psychology, marketing, and personal branding. The torture survivors learned to present their experiences in ways that maximized emotional impact while minimizing any suggestion of weakness or damage. The psychological revolution extended beyond individual success stories to influence broader social attitudes about suffering, resilience, and achievement. Medieval society began to recognize that adversity could be a source of strength rather than just victimization. The cultural narrative around suffering shifted to acknowledge its potential value as a foundation for future success. This change in perspective influenced religious thought, philosophical discussion, and literary expression throughout the medieval period. The idea that suffering could be transformed into strength became a central theme in religious writing, secular literature, and philosophical discourse. The torture victim success stories provided concrete examples of how adversity could be overcome and converted into advantage. The psychological techniques developed by torture survivors also influenced broader practices for building trust and credibility in medieval society. Their methods for strategic vulnerability, disclosure, emotional storytelling, and authentic presentation became standard elements of diplomatic, commercial, and social interaction. Modern psychology has recognized many of the principles pioneered by medieval torture victim entrepreneurs. Research on post-traumatic growth, resilience building, and the psychology of authenticity has validated many of the insights that these historical figures discovered through practical experience. The legacy of their psychological innovations can be seen in contemporary approaches to personal branding, crisis communication, and reputation management. The fundamental understanding that authentic adversity can enhance rather than diminish credibility remains a powerful principle in modern professional and commercial contexts. The hidden economics of trust, the success of torture victim merchants, revealed hidden economic principles about the value of trust and credibility that challenged conventional understanding of medieval commerce. Their achievements demonstrated that psychological and social factors could be more valuable than traditional commercial assets like money, goods, or connections. The torture survivors had discovered that trust was not just a facilitating factor in business transactions, it was a tradable commodity that could be accumulated, enhanced, and monetized through systematic techniques. Their suffering provided them with a form of social capital that could be converted into economic advantage through careful management and strategic presentation. This insight led to the development of sophisticated economic theories about the role of reputation and credibility in commercial success. Medieval scholars began to recognize that psychological factors could have measurable economic value that exceeded the worth of tangible assets. The torture victim success stories also revealed the economic potential of authenticity in a world increasingly concerned about fraud and deception. As commercial networks became more complex and transactions involved greater risks, the ability to provide genuine proof of trustworthiness became extraordinarily valuable. The economic principles discovered by torture survivors influenced broader medieval thinking about value, pricing, and competitive advantage. Their success demonstrated that intangible assets like reputation and credibility could be systematically developed and leveraged for commercial gain. These insights contributed to the early development of concepts that would later become central to modern economics: brand value, reputation capital, and the economic role of information asymmetries. The torture survivors had essentially created the first systematic approach to building and monetizing personal brand value. The hidden economics of trust also revealed the potential for systematic arbitrage between different markets' valuations of credibility. A torture survivor whose experience was common in one region might find their credibility much more valuable in markets where such experiences were rare or highly prized. This led to sophisticated strategies for optimizing the economic value of torture experiences through geographic arbitrage, market timing, and strategic positioning that anticipated modern approaches to personal brand management and career development. We're now entering the final phase of this remarkable story of transformation and triumph. If you're inspired by these incredible examples of turning adversity into advantage, Make sure to subscribe and share this video. The conclusion reveals how these ancient strategies continue to influence success and survival in the modern world. The modern parallels, while the specific practice of converting torture experiences into commercial advantage disappeared from mainstream commerce centuries ago, the underlying principles discovered by medieval trauma entrepreneurs continue to influence success strategies in the contemporary world. Modern research in psychology and behavioral economics has validated many of the insights that torture survivors discovered through practical experience. Studies on authentic leadership, vulnerability in business relationships, and the psychology of trust have confirmed that strategic disclosure of personal adversity can enhance rather than diminish professional credibility. Contemporary entrepreneurs and business leaders often employ techniques that closely parallel those developed by medieval torture survivors. The strategic sharing of personal struggles, the use of adversity as proof of resilience and determination, and the conversion of suffering into social capital all remain recognizable in modern business practices. The most successful modern practitioners understand, like their medieval predecessors, that authenticity requires genuine experience, and that audiences can distinguish between real and manufactured adversity. The principles of costly signaling that made torture scars so credible in medieval markets continue to operate in contemporary professional contexts. Modern business biographies often feature strategic disclosure of personal struggles, failures, and adversities that serve to build credibility and emotional connection with audiences. The narrative structure of these stories closely parallels the techniques developed by medieval torture survivors for presenting their experiences to maximum advantage. The authentication challenges that plagued the medieval torture victim transformation economy also persist in contemporary contexts. Modern audiences have become increasingly sophisticated at detecting manufactured authenticity and artificial vulnerability, creating ongoing demand for genuine rather than strategic adversity narratives. The organizational techniques developed by medieval transformation networks have influenced modern approaches to professional networking, mentorship, and career development. The mutual support systems, knowledge-sharing practices, and collaborative strategies pioneered by torture survivor guilds provided models for contemporary professional associations and support networks. Perhaps most importantly, the fundamental insight that extreme adversity can be systematically converted into competitive advantage remains relevant in modern contexts, where resilience, authenticity, and proven performance under pressure are highly valued professional qualities. The ultimate transformation, the story of medieval merchants who transformed torture survival into enormous wealth, reveals profound truths about human nature, economics, value, and the potential for converting even the most extreme adversity into opportunity and advantage. These historical figures prove that with sufficient creativity, strategic thinking, and determination, any experience could be transformed into value. Their success was based on sophisticated understanding of psychology, economics, and social dynamics that anticipated modern discoveries by centuries. They recognized that authenticity had measurable economic value, that suffering could enhance, rather than diminish, credibility, and that strategic vulnerability could create powerful emotional connections with business partners. The torture survivors, who became millionaire merchants, demonstrated that traditional assumptions about victimhood and disadvantage could be completely overturned through systematic application of strategic thinking and innovative presentation techniques. They transformed their greatest weakness into their greatest strength through careful analysis and creative implementation. But perhaps most importantly, these historical figures proved that human beings possess extraordinary capacity for resilience and adaptation that can overcome almost any obstacle. Their ability to find opportunity within suffering, to create advantage from disadvantage, and to build wealth from wounds demonstrates the fundamental human capacity for transformation and growth. The medieval torture victim entrepreneurs succeeded because they understood that every experience, no matter how negative or traumatic, contains potential value that can be unlocked through proper analysis and strategic application. They refused to accept victimhood as their final state and instead chose to view their suffering as raw material for creating something valuable and meaningful. Their legacy reminds us that adversity is not just something to be endured or overcome, but potentially something to be transformed and leveraged for positive outcomes. The techniques they developed for converting suffering into success provide timeless principles that remain relevant for anyone facing significant challenges or seeking to extract value from difficult experiences. The story of these remarkable historical figures challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about failure, trauma, and disadvantage. It suggests that with sufficient creativity and determination, even the most negative experiences can be transformed into foundations for extraordinary success and achievement. As we reflect on their achievements, we're reminded that human potential for transformation and growth extends far beyond what most people imagine possible. The torture survivors who became wealthy merchants prove that there are no limits to what human beings can accomplish when they combine strategic thinking with unshakable determination to create value from any circumstance. The incredible journey of these medieval entrepreneurs, from torture victims to millionaires, reveals timeless truths about human resilience, strategic thinking, and the extraordinary potential for transformation that exists within every challenge we face. Their legacy continues to inspire and instruct anyone seeking to turn adversity into advantage and suffering into success. If these remarkable stories of transformation have inspired you as much as they've inspired me, make sure to subscribe for more incredible tales of human triumph that challenge everything we think we know about success, survival, and the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit to overcome any obstacle. The medieval merchants who turned torture scars into gold understood a fundamental truth that remains powerful today. Our greatest weaknesses, when approached with creativity and determination, can become our greatest strengths. Their transformation from victims to victors proves that no matter how dark the circumstances, human ingenuity can always find a path to not just survival, but extraordinary success.